Good morning. Thank you for joining in once again as we continue our story of St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis's father, Pietro di Bernardoni, was a successful cloth merchant. And according to one recent biographer, he amassed one of the largest fortunes in Umbria. Many say that Lady Pica, Francis's mother, was French. Francis was taught at an early age to sing in French. There are other scholars who would say that she was born in Assisi. We'll let the scholars debate that. But she radiated warmth and serenity. Did Francis have siblings? It's commonly accepted that he had a brother, Angelo, and it's possible that he may have had at least one other. Until Francis went to school in the parish church at age 8, his mother gave him lessons at home. She told him Greek and Roman stories, the lives of the saints, stories of great men. On other days, she would recite poetry, and Francis learned to play a musical instrument, most likely a viol or harp. Francis' mother taught him manners, cheerfulness, generosity, courtesy, and deference to his elders. Francis was eager and affectionate, longing to please. However, his dad wasn't too very impressed because Francis was small for his age and often quite ill. His father wasn't too concerned about the qualities that mother was instilling in Francis. When Francis was 8, he went to the parish school where he learned the essentials of religion as well as grammar and rhetoric. That was the extent for the most part of his formal education. Later in life, Francis would refer to himself as simplex et idiota, ignorant and unlearned. He said that to compare himself to the educated clerics who were entering his brotherhood. I'm just simplex et idiota. About the age of 13, Francis began working with his father in the family business, that of being a cloth merchant. He likely accompanied his father on trips to fairs, and in the process may have picked up some French. He had his life cut out for him. He plunged into a career as a merchant in which he worked successfully for about 10 years. Francis got money from his father. He spent it on fine clothing and partying, and he tried to imitate the courtly manners of the privileged classes of his time. I'd like to read a description of his physical appearance as we have from his earliest biographer, Thomas of Celano. Celano was a Franciscan. He joined the Franciscans in 1215. After Francis's death, Pope Gregory IX commissioned Celano to write the first life of Francis. Francis died in 1226 and was canonized in 1228. Then Celano got busy. Here's what he writes about Francis' physical appearance. He was of medium height, close to short, his forehead small and smooth, with medium eyes, black and clear. His hair was dark, his nose even and thin. What an even nose is, I'm not certain. His ears were small, his teeth were white, well set and even, Chelano writes. His lips were small and thin. His beard was black and sparse. His neck was slender, his hands slight, his finger long and his nails tapered. Chelano was very much observant. He had thin legs, small feet, fine skin, and little flesh. Interesting to figure out exactly what each of those descriptions mean. At some point in this series, we'll certainly look at images of Francis. Here's another description now of how Francis was, not how he looked, but how he was, also by Chelano. Since he was very rich, he was not greedy, but he was extravagant. Not a hoarder of money, but a squanderer of his property. A prudent dealer, but a most unreliable steward. He was nevertheless a rather kindly person, adaptable and quite affable, even though it made him look foolish. For this reason, more than anything else, his kindliness, his adaptability, his affability, many went over to him. Thus, with his crowded procession of misfits, he used to strut about impressively and in high spirits. Again, the description by Thomas of Chelano, Francis's contemporary. Assisi during these years was experiencing many social tensions. The political situation in central Italy was chaotic. Communes were being created. The newly elected Pope, Innocent III, who was Pope from 1198 to 1216, and who was considered one of the most powerful popes in the Middle Ages, was seeking to strengthen his own hand in the region. The German emperor, died suddenly. There was chaos. Folks were trying to fill the vacancy. In Assisi, the commoners took advantage of the situation and formed a militia, which Francis was likely part, and stormed the citadel that dominated the town. You can see it in the picture here of Assisi. And they razed it to the ground. They also vented their anger by ransacking the townhouses of the nobility. Francis was outfitted as a knight. Many of the militia took refuge in neighboring Perugia, Assisi's bitter rival, just across the valley. Other little towns got into the action and took sides. The Assisi militia, of which Francis was a member, was intending to strike a decisive blow against Perugia in November of 1202, but instead suffered a serious defeat. Because Francis was seen as a wealthy person, he was taken prisoner and held for ransom. He languished for a year in a dark, damp jail. In 1203, a truce was reached, and Francis was released and went home. Hardly a hero. It was that year in jail, dear friends, that Francis was given the opportunity to reevaluate his life. However, he made one more attempt at worldly glory by joining in 1205 a local branch of the crusade, which was fighting for papal interests in southern Italy. But shortly after leaving Assisi, reaching Spoleto, just 20 miles east of Assisi, he developed a fever, and he had a dream. A memorable dream. Every time I've heard the story of Francis told, this dream is reported. Allow me just to read the way Damien Varro, in his first encounters with Francis of Assisi, describes this. A voice broke into his sleep with a dialogue, a worthy dialogue. Francis, where are you going? To fight in Puy. From whom do you expect more? From the master or from the servant? From the master. Then why follow the servant? Lord, what do you want me to do? Go back to your country. There your calling will be shown to you. So Francis abruptly gave up the effort of being a soldier and returns home. Over the next 2 years, he embarks upon what he would call a life of penance, working to achieve a whole new perspective on reality, trying to see the world from God's point of view. In his last will and testament, which we'll certainly talk about, Francis would remember the critical stages of how, quotes, the Lord led me to begin doing penance. And he recalls that his first step in this life of penance was when God gave him the grace to overcome his revulsion towards lepers and to go among them and show mercy. You may recall that last time I said that in Assisi, there were 3 classes of citizens, even reflected in the layout of the town. The top layer were the nobility. The middle layer were the merchants. That's where Francis' family lived. The lowest level was where the poor dwelt. The whole city was walled in for obvious reasons. But outside the city wall was a whole other world. At this time of it, there was a large number of lepers. And this is where Francis went to spend his time. In his popular history of Francis, Father Dominic Monti notes that in the 12th century, there seems to have been an upsurge of the incidence of leprosy in Western Europe. He writes, Monti does, the grotesque appearance and revolting stench of those plagued with the disease contributed to the ancient belief that leprosy was God's punishment for sin, which could be spread to others by the poison breath of its carriers. Like most of his contemporaries, Francis viewed lepers not simply as unfortunate, but as persons to be shunned. In 1179, the Third Lateran Council of the Church ordered that lepers be segregated from other Christians. And yet Francis would write in his testament that the Lord led me among lepers. He wrote, and I quote, When I was in sin, it seemed very bitter for me to see lepers. And the Lord led me among them, and I showed mercy to them. And when I was with them, that which had seemed bitter to me was turned into sweetness of soul and body. He then writes, after that, I did not wait long before I left the world. There's a story that's commonly told of an encounter that Francis had with the leper as he was riding on his horse, Francis, all dressed in his finery. He encounters an individual leper on the road, ringing the bell, unclean, unclean. Francis rides by, but then suddenly something impels him to stop. He gets down off of his horse. He goes up to the leper and embraces him, gives him a coin. The leper suddenly disappears, and Francis realized through the inspiration of the Spirit that he had encountered Christ. Whether that dramatic event happened, or, and this is perhaps more likely, Francis simply was generous of heart and let the Lord lead him to come close and minister and see through new eyes. This was a pivotal moment in Francis' life. It took place in 1205, and it's commonly accepted as his moment of conversion to a whole new way of seeing life. He begins ministering to lepers in an infirmary, staffed by the Croziers. Now, remember, Francis was born in 1182, so he's now 23 years old. And it's at this time in his life that he has another dramatic encounter with the Lord. That's where we'll pick up next time. Let me just close with a question. When Francis' conversion took place, was it dramatic, like a sudden encounter with Christ, or because he was a person of generous heart, somehow letting the Lord lead him along? And his ministry among lepers was a natural next step. Either is possible. The latter is probably more likely. That's a story like our own conversions. I had an experience when I was provincial, visiting friars living in Kenya, in Africa. We went out into the bush, and they had a clinic, and in that clinic was a woman they wanted me to meet. I confess that I met her, but I was scared to death to touch her. I didn't. I left her personally unchanged. A graced opportunity that was missed. But God's faithful and continues to give me opportunities as he continues to give us all opportunities. St. Francis can show us how to have generous spirit and be open to the ways that God calls us. God's never going to give up on me. God's never going to give up on you. Thank you, St. Francis, for your example. Thank you, Lord, for calling us anew today. I look forward to next week. Thank you.